Hey, this is Zachlog the Great. My first video was addressing the reaction of the left to the election of President Donald Trump. It's been just over a year, and it seems like I'll have to return to the subject now. What fascinates me is that leftists pride themselves above all things on being compassionate and empathetic. I could not disagree more. If you are conveniently slotted into one of their victim categories, they are very interested in your feelings. Your actual well-being, they might not care very much about that. But your feelings, well, those are a big deal. If, on the other hand, you are not in one of those victim categories, you are either a non-entity or a villain, and they have not a scrap of sympathy or interest in your well-being. The election of Donald Trump to the presidency illustrated this perfectly. Immediately after the election, within the week, we started hearing stories of this wave of horrible hate crimes by vicious racists emboldened by Trump's election. These stories were carried by multiple news sources and collected and republished by the SPLC. Almost none of these stories were actually investigated to any degree. And those that were quickly proven not only false, but deliberately fraudulent. What was the purpose of these stories? Why were they told? To paint as completely black and irredeemable anyone guilty of thought crime. Were they true? It didn't matter at all. In fact, many of them were ridiculous on the face, but were happily passed on by leftists eager to smear their enemies. Is this empathy? Is this compassion and understanding? No. It's hatred. And indulging, coddling, and feeding your hatred is a dangerous habit. Now, if this weren't bad enough already, because of the bile being spewed against Trump supporters, we have at least 2 documented instances of attacks against people for their support, real or imagined, of Trump. A white man was pulled out of his own car and beaten bloody by a group of blacks yelling about Trump. A mentally retarded young white man was held hostage, beaten, slashed with knives for being white and supporting Trump. A number of Republican politicians have been shot at or otherwise physically assaulted, including Steve Scalise and Rand Paul. These are not myths. These are not hearsay. These are clearly documented facts. And there are many more cases. And to claim that they have nothing to do with the hatred constantly being stirred up against President Trump and his supporters is risible. Of course, at the actual inauguration, there were protests which caused hundreds of thousands of dollars of damage. Not in protest against any particular policy, but against the man himself and the results of the election. Just recently, these were repeated by a bunch of leftist overgrown children screaming at the sky in protest. There's also the pointless, horrendously expensive, and personally destructive Russia collusion investigation, which has been admitted as a complete mirage by the very people pushing it the hardest. I believe Commie Van Jones' description was nothing burger. Now, if you hate President Trump and joined in these protests, I'd just like you to consider this. Do you not think we who disagree with you felt much the same in 2008 and 2012? Do you think we did not experience much the same pain and fear and confusion? Of course we did. Do you know what we didn't do? We didn't demand the entire world grind to a halt because of our disappointment. We didn't waste tens of millions of dollars of state resources on an investigation that had no basis whatsoever. We didn't engage in protests which caused hundreds of thousands of dollars of property damage, and we didn't create this myth that supporters of President Obama were engaged in a wave of hate crimes. Do you know why we didn't do this? Because we believed that those who think differently than us have rights. We believed that the stability of the system itself has a great deal of value, even if the current results are not to our liking. We believed that we all need to get up the next day and go to work and make things run. I must admit that your recent behavior has shaken these beliefs. Many of us have begun to ponder that if this is how we're going to be treated, why should we not happily return the same? And yet you call yourselves compassionate and empathetic, and you could not extend one atom of this massive store of empathy to those of us who disagree with you. No. What we got was childishly obvious slander and, practically speaking, a declaration of war. We have been declared not just wrong, but the enemy. How many of us have done any real harm? Almost none. In America, political violence is almost exclusively a phenomenon of the left. It doesn't matter. In your mythology, we're cast as monsters, deplorable and irredeemable. And if this is the course you intend to pursue, we can hardly dissuade you. You don't hear us, and you have dismissed our concerns as entirely illegitimate. But if you can hear, even just a little bit, I warn you to be wary. Tell a man often enough that he is a monster, and he may just decide to become one. It may be a wiser choice to practice a little bit of this empathy you love to brag about and ask yourself if maybe, just maybe, these monsters might actually be human. And maybe, just maybe, if they might have legitimate concerns that you need to listen to and address. Otherwise, the monster of your creation is waiting for you. And you have taught him exactly what fair play and mutual respect is worth. It's your choice.